the idea that we have to sit on the floor and do floor time 100% of the time with a baby is neither realistic nor is it healthy for a child.
Yeah.
Children also need to play in the dirt.
How do you feel about the cry it out method?
Crying it out, particularly under the age of 1, is neurologically damaging to children.
Yep.
You can do everything in life that you want to. You just can't do it all at the same time.
Welcome to Under the Sun podcast. I'm Ilea.
And I'm Irene. Grab a cup of coffee and your comfiest sweats and join us every Monday as two best friends discuss everything from raising free-range gremlins to business and really everything under the sun.
Let's get started, and thanks for being here. Today, I am so excited about this interview. Honestly, Erica, I'm not going to lie, I'm nerding out like a lot, and it takes a lot for me to nerd out. So I'm very excited about this interview. Erica, would you mind just telling our guests like who you are and what you do?
I'm Erica Komizar. I'm a psychoanalyst and an author, and I write about parent guidance issues and child development and the mental health crisis in children.
Amazing. So the first time I heard about you, heard of you, was on Alex Clark's podcast. And then pretty subsequently on Lila Rose's podcast. And then I just like went down the rabbit hole and watched you on like Dad Saves America and a whole bunch of interviews. So I definitely recommend our listeners to listen to those interviews as well, because it's just such a wealth of knowledge. For me, listening to your Alex Clark podcast, I'm a new mom. My kid's about to turn 2, and hearing the things you said validated all the things I was feeling, because I left my job. I left my corporate job, and everyone was like, "What are you doing leaving your corporate job?" Like,
she was what, 6 months old? She was little still.
Yeah, and I was like working from home, and I was struggling because I was like, I was putting her first, and my job was just bottom burner. I was like, I don't care about this anymore. I feel like I have one shot at this, and I don't like, I am the only mother she'll ever have. And I was like, I can't outsource this job. Like I can't. And I'm a recovering toxic feminist. So like, you know, the toxic side of it, I thought children ruined your life and you'd never be able to travel. And it's, you know, just a bad thing. And that's not how I feel. That's not how I think anymore. So hearing that interview was very validating. So I appreciate that so much. But we have both your books back here, Being There. And you also said that it's your alternate title was The Lost Instinct. Is that correct? Which I love. What is that instinct that you talk about?
Well, I mean, all mammals in an evolutionary way prioritize their offspring. You know, they have to go out and hunt to feed their babies, but they're not leaving for anything but the absolute necessity of having to leave. And so we're mammals. And so the idea that we have moved away from our instincts and generationally suppressed and ultimately repressed some of the instincts as mothers. That is my very old, talk about nurturing. That is my 16-year-old golden doodle who is coughing right now. So you can cut this out. It's okay. On me.
We're really honest and genuine. Like it's okay. It is what it is.
So I'm just going to say it's a little like Dr. Dolittle. We have a lot of animals,
I love
as
it.
well as babies. So
amazing.
My Peloton name is Baby and Dog Lover. So I think, anyway, so you might hear him cough every once in a while.
That's all right.
Anyway, our instincts drive us towards our offspring, and what we call maternal preoccupation is normal. And so if we suppress it for long enough, for generations, then actually it becomes a repressed instinct, which is unconscious, meaning we no longer feel the drive, the instinct, and the preoccupation to be with our children. So there was a very important piece of research by a man named Michael Meany, which showed that mothers who licked and groomed their young passed on to the next generation the ability to lick and groom their young. But if mothers couldn't lick and groom their young, they didn't pass it on to the next generation. And the babies that had been licked and groomed became more resilient to stress and adversity than the babies who weren't licked and groomed.
That's
So as
fascinating.
mammals, it's instinctual to be maternally. So what happened to you with your career, and what happens to a lot of women, is that before they have children, before those instincts are turned on, before the oxytocin is flowing in their bodies, they feel very, very driven towards they feel an attachment to their work. So, attachment it's relational attachment to their work. Their work becomes their baby. And then when they have a baby, they shift that attachment to their actual baby. But many mothers, because of generational, you'd say, suppression and then repression of that instinct, it never gets awakened in them. And those babies suffer a lot.
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so she told my dad back early when they were dating, he's like, well, what do you want to do with your life? And she said, I just want to have a lot of kids and stay home with him. And he did everything in his power, and there's 5 of us, to let her stay home with us. So when I remember being 12, and I think I've told the story on the podcast before, but I remember being at a family gathering. I was like 10, 12-ish, give or take. And my mom was that was her job. That's what she always did. And I had a family member say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said something along the lines of, well, I just want to grow up and be a mom. And I remember I had a handful of like great aunts and uncles or older cousins. Don't remember word for word, but they basically said, oh, you're too smart for that. And those words stuck in my brain, despite, even though my mom she was at every function, every game, she was a camp counselor, everywhere we went, she went. But it's interesting that just 1 or 2 family members that were older saying, oh, you're too smart for that, kind of clicked. Oh yeah, I'm too smart to just stay at home. And it's so fascinating.
So what's the implication there? The implication is that mothers are stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, so if we really look at the societal messaging, the thing is, the way I think about it is that life is long, and it's longer and longer. I mean, I can't tell you how many people now I know live till 100. I mean, I'll be 60 this summer, and how many people are living to 100 and over 100? And it's because we've gotten better with the science of living longer. So that means you have 100 years to live a life. Okay. Let's say even you have 80 years. I'll be less generous. So the very early years when you're raising your children, when they need you, are not going to change the ultimate path of your life. And that's something young women don't understand, because they've been taught to be so paranoid that if they don't grab onto the gold ring now, they will never, ever have a career outside the home. And you can do everything in life that you want to. You just can't do it all at the same time. And to devalue mothering, there are many women who say, that is what I want my meaningful work to be. And that is incredible. There are other women that say, I want to, have meaningful work, but I still want to be able to prioritize my kid. That's also wonderful. So a lot of people took my book to say women can't work and have healthy children. The truth is that we use a term in my field. It's intensity and degree. If the intensity and degree of your drive to be the best at your work outside the home is preoccupying, then it pushes out maternal preoccupation, which is what your child needs to be healthy. They need you to be maternally preoccupied. That doesn't mean obsessive or helicopter parent. It just means that your drive is concern, attention, and loving and nurturing that child. And so that is sadly generationally getting lost. And I mean really getting lost. The statistics on whether young people your age actually want children are pretty abysmal. Because if mothering is such drudgery, if it is so horrendous and obligatory and boring and freedom swallowing up, then who's going to want to have a child?
Yeah.
And then societies die. This is the way societies die, when we deprioritize something that has been keeping us alive for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Maternal preoccupation.
Yeah. I remember I mean, same as you. I remember sneaking my sisters had like magazines hidden under, like hidden in places that my parents wouldn't want them to read, like, I don't know, like Cosmo. And I remember reading, like basically something like, why be a mother and waste your time there when you can go basically be a girl boss and have everything you need and not rely on a man and all those things. And I'm just so surprised at how much I took all that stuff to heart, because for many years we were both touring musicians, and we heard all the time of like, oh yeah, once you have kids, your whole drive for that, goes kaput. It's and you don't want kids to ruin your touring career. That's the life. You get to go on stage and people can cheer you on and all those things. And it's like, at some point though, like we make the joke of like my uterus hurt. Like, yeah, like no, like my uterus, like my priorities internally and in my DNA is shifting. Mm-hmm. And I have this strong desire that I would rather lose every single accolade, every single person who knows my name, sings my songs, to just forget me, and so that I have the opportunity to like have a baby. And then she was born, and it's like, honestly, like I'm like a grumpy sleeper. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be great at night. My husband's going to have to be the one who does the baby at night because I'm grumpy. And like my brain changed, my personality changed, where I was so loving and nurturing. I mean, hopefully still am, but like, just, it's funny, the gene or whatever it is that kicks on, and like probably got it from my mom because she was a stay-at-home mom, very nurturing, very loving. And it's just like, how do we guide friends that are like, oh, I'm never having kids, that is a death trap? Like what, like how do we help friends of ours who think that motherhood is like a death sentence? Because that's how I hear it from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what you can do is to say to them, to tell them your story, that it was a transformative experience for you, but you recognize it isn't that way for everyone. And some people's losses and pains and traumas from early childhood with their own mothers are so deep and so painful that they can't get past those, their own attachment disorders, or they don't want to, because we know that if you go for therapy, you can work towards a better outcome for your own children. But I don't think everybody's cut out. You have to make sacrifices. And I think one thing is be honest, and two is be optimistic and say it's a beautiful thing. I mean, so I started a campaign on I think Instagram or on social media coming up to Mother's Day, because all of the narratives out there, a lot of the narratives, not all of them, but a lot of the narratives on the internet and on social media are so negative about mothering. You have websites where women just share how much they hate pregnancy and they hate breastfeeding and they hate young babies, and they wish they hadn't done it. And it
breaks my heart.
It's so depressing, and they wish, and it's a trend. So, it's angry. It's angry about this vulnerable little person. And I don't judge those women. I say that is a young woman who is suffering. That's a suffering young woman who probably suffered as a child, never got the help, and then had a baby and didn't have that transformative experience. So, I always say that young women who want to have children should probably go and talk to somebody if they feel any ambivalence, and work through some of that ambivalence. You can't work through all of it, but work through some of that ambivalence before you decide to have a baby, because maybe you'll decide you're willing to go for it, and there's enough love, interest in it that you're willing to take the risk of that transformative experience. But some women probably should decide not to have children. Yeah. And I think that that's probably right. And I think there would probably be less children who suffer if the women who really couldn't make the sacrifices and didn't want to, Penelope Leach many years before me said, if you don't want to care for your children, don't have them. And I think that's right. I think that caring for children is the important part. And it doesn't mean you have to be there 100% of the time. And it doesn't mean you can't have some kind of career when you have young children. It just means that the career is the accessory and the children are the main outfit, as opposed to the other way around, which is that the children have become an accessory, like a scarf or a belt. And when your children are the accessory to your life, your children will likely have some kind of mental challenges in the future.
Yeah. My daughter just turned 3 this past March, and around her birthday, I had an emotional something. I don't know what it was, where I told my husband, because I do work, and I was like, I wasted the first 3 years of her life, but we built the business. So we started a salon in 2019. My son was 6 months old, and when we started that, I told my husband, whatever our decision for starting this business, and we only had the one at 6 months. I said, I want the kids. I don't want to the kids to grow up without me. And I forget basically kids. And I kept saying kids, and he's like, kids. And I said, oh, and to the best of my ability, I want the kids to be 2 years apart. And he's like, okay, crazy lady. But they're 1 month, just under a month shy of being 2 years apart. And we built a whole nursery in the shop that was theirs. So our whole family went to work together every day. Mm-hmm. And I still, even though they came to work with me that whole time, I had this moment where I told my husband, I was like, I wasted the first 3 years of her life. And he said, didn't you nurse her till she was 2? And I was like, yeah. And he said, she was physically attached to you every 3 hours for 2 years. But even though
she was with you,
and
at
she
work.
was with me, and I would take breaks in between.
Yeah.
It's so funny how like that instinct of like, I should have just not worked at all. But I felt like we had a good balance, but it's still like an interesting
if you
stressor.
Go to India, if you go to any developing world, if you go to India, if you go to Africa, there are many mothers who just are caring for many children. But the reality is most of them have to go out into the fields to pick their potatoes. They have to go to their little shop on the main street to sell, their pharmaceutical items or their fruits and vegetables. And very young children under the age of school age go with their mothers to work. They go to the shop. They go to the weaving cooperative. They go to the bakery where the mother works. They go to the fields with their mothers to pick the potatoes and play in the dirt. It's not, the idea that we have to sit on the floor and do floor time 100% of the time with the baby is neither realistic nor is it healthy for a child. Yeah. Children also need to play in the dirt and play with toys. If you have no stimulation for them and no toys, toys, I've been trekking in parts of the world where a toy was a piece of corn with a piece of fabric wrapped around it. And that was their teddy bear, but it was a toy. And you could play with that toy for hours. My point is that work is not the demon here. The demon here is, if there is a demon, and there really is no demon, but you'd say the problem is that we have created a society where working is working the way that men work. And that was the problem with the feminist movement, that we leave our children behind. So men had the luxury of being able to go to work. And remember, women were hunters, women were gatherers, men were hunters. So the men went out into the world and went for days and days. And the women stayed around and gathered the berries and gathered the nuts and cooked, grounded the corn. So the children could be with them. The children couldn't go, a little baby can't go on a hunt to catch a deer. So the idea that men in an evolutionary way have always left, but that women always had their young children either on their bodies or around them. We've sort of lost the thread, which is, why are women doing work either from home or entrepreneurial work or starting businesses together? When I was a little girl, there was a stationery store in my neighborhood. I don't even know if they have stationery stores anymore where they sell stationery.
Yeah.
And it was 2 women, and they always had their children there, and they always had their dogs there. And it was like your salon. And so, I think it's how we think about work outside the home.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned like not sitting on the floor with them for hours. What does it look like when you're talking about secure attachment and being a present mom, obviously emotionally and physically? Like, what is the ideal situation of like one-on-one time? And also, like, she has multiple kids. Like, how does that look? Because like we're talking about adding another one, and I'm like, how does it work to balance to make sure everybody feels like you're a present mom?
You are the master of distress. So I have an essay coming out in the Wall Street Journal for Mother's Day on my own mother. And my mother, I always say my mother was the queen of distress, meaning, in fact, she was probably not as good when things were happy because she just said, well, she's all right and let her play. But when I was in distress, she would rush to my side and sit down and hug me and hold my hand and make skin to skin contact and bring me back to homeostasis. So that's, mothers are the soothers of distress. And so you can't do that remotely. You can't do that if you're at a banking job and you're never home. You can't do that if you're a lawyer or a doctor in the hospital. You can do that if you're in a salon. You can do that if you have a shop. You can do that if you're, a physical therapist and your children are around, and, you might be with a client, but if your baby's in distress, as soon as you're done with the client, you go to your baby, you can do that with certain careers. You can't do it with all, but the idea is to be present when they're in distress. The other thing is to be there to play with them. We know that play is how children learn. It's how they feel, sort of how they resolve conflict. It's how they learn about frustration tolerance. It's how they develop the right brain. And parents play a big role, particularly, mothers, but fathers really a lot, in terms of, really stimulating and playing, but you don't play all the time. Every day you have to have some floor time with babies. Every day. It's just, and being interested in them. So, I think the other thing that we've lost is we're not really that interested in childhood. We're not that interested in children, because children are fascinating. They're fascinating to watch. They're fascinating to play with.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so what we've lost is that, like, adults say, I can't play with my children. It's boring,
Yeah.
Now, again, fathers are better at play instinctually than mothers. But mothers also, with very young babies, the ability to sit on the floor and do floor time, or make Play-Doh and play with Play-Doh, or to take the finger paints out and regress, because that's what you do when you play with your child. You regress, you become a little girl again, is very important for children. But not every minute. So, to not take it literally and say that you leave time in the day for children to have time where they're self-stimulating, right? But that you're also playing with them, throughout the day.
Yeah.
But primarily mothers are the soothers of children when they're in distress. So if you're an earshot or eyeshot of your child when they hurt themselves or they're frustrated, or you're there to help them, bring them back to homeostasis, by hugging them. And
Is there a difference too? So then another thing that we tried nannies for a little bit that would just come to, they would meet us at work and then watch. My husband works on his own too. But then after a while, we kind of just decided we don't want, even though they're with us all the time, we just don't want anybody else raising our kids. Is there a difference when it's dad? Because eventually we got to the point where they got old enough and they would just stay home and I would go to work, but they were with their dad. Is there anything, as long as they're with a parent, does that make a difference? Or is mom really?
If it's under 3, children do best with primarily, again, to say primarily with their primary attachment figure, which is usually the mother. Once in a while it's the father, but it's usually the mother. The reason being that fathers, unless the father is very unique, because there are some fathers who are very unique, who are more nurturing than mothers, and sometimes what fathers do is they'll compensate. If a mother isn't nurturing, it's interesting instinctually. It's what happens in nature sometimes. If a mother abandons a cub, a father sometimes steps up.
Interesting. Wow. Man, nature is
beautiful. But it doesn't happen often. Mostly those babies just die. And so, but sometimes the father steps up. So I would say it's more sort of not the rule, but the exception, that fathers primary attachment figures. So in the first 3 years, you need what's called sensitive empathic nurturing. You need a parent who's going to tune into your distress and not dismiss it, not encourage you away from it, not separate from your feelings. Fathers are through play, they help to regulate things like aggression and excitement, but they also help you to separate from the sensitive empathic nurturing of your mothers. Come on, let's go play a little rough play. Let's, but in the first 3 years, you really need that sensitive, empathic nurture. But having said that, if you can train your husband to be a sensitive, empathic nurturer, a husband is kinship bonds.
Yeah.
It's better than a nanny if,
Yeah.
in fact, he can be a sensitive, empathic nurturer. But if he's the kind that would, when the baby falls down, he goes, "Come on, get up. You're fine. Brush yourself off.
Yeah.
La, la, la. Let's go play." Then, it's like, that's not what children need. Unless you teach him. You say, when the baby falls down, we sit down, we hug the baby, we look at the baby, we say, "Oh, honey, I see you're hurt. Let me give you a hug. How are you feeling? Are you sad? That's okay." And so that's what mothers do uniquely that fathers don't do. And if a father is going to be left with that baby under 3, that doesn't take away the ability of the father to play and encourage separation at other times. But when a baby is in distress, that's when a baby needs to feel safe.
But Erica, I heard it many times with my young child. If you pick her up every time she cries, you're going to spoil her.
So is that what your husband says, or
no.
your in-laws?
Oh no, it's
okay.
External sources.
So that's exactly the problem.
Yeah.
So if you have a secondary nurturer like that, you want to fire them. You can't fire your husband.
No, it was definitely not my husband, Dave.
I think our husbands are both unique.
They're
we married unique ones. They're good
they're
ones.
They're unicorns, very nurturing.
Yeah. So if you're going to leave your child with a unicorn as a husband, but that kind of sentiment is really damaging for children. The idea that it's a trope, right? It's a negative narrative that you can love children too much. You can cuddle them too much. You can coddle them. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it was about adolescence. He doesn't talk about young children, which always bothered me, because the thing is, you don't want to coddle older children and adolescents. You want to leave some room for them to develop some resilience. But the truth is, you do coddle very young children. And even with adolescents, sometimes you do coddle them, just not all the time. The idea is whatever coddling means, which is sensitive, empathic nurturing, skin-to-skin contact, affection, empathic, reflective mirroring of emotions, that you want to do all the time. So the trope that, you pick them up too much, that's very damaging. Very damaging.
And people will have I think some listeners, might have a hard time hearing that. I've felt that way ever since since I gave birth to my kid. I was like, there's no way I could be like, "Oh, shock it up, you're fine. I'll just, deal with it." But it's, I heard it many times, or like we'd have her in a sling or something, and we'd go to an event because I didn't want to pass her around like a potato. And people would be like, "Oh, like if you just soothe her every time she cries, she's going to get used to it." And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. I'm her mother. I should she should be able to trust that if she cries, I will be there. Yeah. So then I'm pretty sure I can assume, but just because I like to poke the bear of the social media. How do you feel about the cry it out method? Do your kids have eczema on their hands, on their face, on their booty, everywhere? Do they have eczema, or do they have anger outbursts?
Do they scratch their booty a lot?
Yeah, it could be. It could be that worms. It could be a stagnant liver. Yeah. It could be they just need some extra kidney, liver support. There's just lots of options. So maybe you should check out BioRay.
Yeah. If you go on their website, they have a little form you can fill out. You can put in any symptoms, everything, and they're very, very good at connecting you with an actual human being. So you're not just talking to a robot the whole time. Yep. They can help you find the right tinctures that you need to supplement the kids with.
And it's gentle because, it's all herbal, so it's a very gentle supplement for your kids. And they also have a whole adult line. So if it's you who's needing help, you who has eczema, has acne, need some help, go check out bioray.com and use our code UTSP10, and you're going to love it. How do you feel about the cry it out method?
So I have a video online, which I think is just about 3 minutes long, about why crying it out, particularly under the age of 1, is neurologically damaging to children. There's a lot of research to show that it damages them neurologically. babies under the age of 1 are not supposed to have their stress reaction, that alarm threat reaction triggered intensely. They're supposed to, when they cry, be soothed. And it's why mothers wear their babies on their bodies in other parts of the world. There was a researcher that I interviewed for my book who said that babies in other parts of the world, in the developing parts of the world, cry less than Western babies, because Western babies are separated from their mother's bodies. And there's something about this projection onto these babies of independence and self-sufficiency that puts them into distress states more, which means that their brains, the amygdala, the threat sensing part of the brain, the cortisol is running through their bodies in a way that it's not supposed to be turned on. Over the age of 1, incremental weaning of babies so they can start to learn to sleep in their own beds, I have no problem with that. I don't call it sleep training, because you don't train babies, you only train dogs. And even then, I don't like the word training. You're teaching a baby how to sleep on their own, but that is teaching gently, weaning them. It's not training them. It's not harsh. It's not let them cry it out. And I think part of the issue, is that adults can no longer see the vulnerability of babies. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. They no longer can look at a baby and see vulnerability, because to look at a baby and see vulnerability, you need to be able to embrace the vulnerability in yourself. And if you've had a rough time as a child, if you were forced to cry it out, if you were put into daycare young, if your mother was more interested in doing whatever other than being with you, then you develop these pathological defenses, right? So not healthy defenses, but they basically interrupt your empathic response. We're meant to look at a baby who's vulnerable and relate to that vulnerability, because we are not afraid of our own vulnerability and dependency. But if we are, then we look at these babies and we go into a schizoid response, which is, I see nothing. The baby's resilient and strong. That is called a schizoid defense. And it's not healthy, to say the least. And so, no, the cry it out method is not ever recommended.
Yeah. I couldn't do it.
No, I didn't do it.
My soul wouldn't let me let my baby just cry.
That means your soul was functioning. It means you had
Let's hope so.
It means you had a functioning, you had functioning instincts.
But the thing is, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
The thing is that I have like friends and, acquaintances that are like, yeah, but you just have to kind of like tune it out, whether it's cry it out method or like when it's about time where they're going to start going back to work and they're dropping their kid off at daycare. They're just like, yeah, it's hard for the first couple of days. And you see it on social media. It's like, oh, hey, why am I struggling so hard with this? Like, I don't want to leave my baby and I am a wreck about it. And then you see people just swooping on social media. It's like, oh, it'll pass. It'll pass. And
that's a schizoid response. That's a schizoid defense. It's not a healthy defense. It's like flipping a switch in the kitchen and you shut off the light. And the truth is, we're never meant to shut down our empathic responses towards our babies. We're meant to feel empathy. Remember, what is empathy? Empathy is being able to put yourself in another person's shoes emotionally and feel the feelings they're feeling. That means these mothers cannot put themselves in their baby's shoes and actually imagine. They can't use their imaginations to imagine the pain that the babies are in when they're left.
Yeah.
And when you stop being able to imagine the pain the baby's in, that baby's lost.
Yeah.
It's so sad. I don't, and it's hard. I'm sure I want everybody to go listen to your other interviews as well, because you guys definitely dive into the daycare discussion and like solutions, nannies and taking your kids to work. And it's such a resource of knowledge. But you said in your book that imagine you start dating somebody in America, you say, and but they're going to move away in 2 months. How connected are you actually going to get to that person if they're about to leave. And that's like, you correlated to that with your baby. If you're about to go back to
Yeah.
work, and work is not the enemy, because like we're here working right now. I edit
Yeah.
podcasts. There are things, you know, we run a farm. There's work
Yeah.
to happen, but there is this thing of like, I see it in society, and you're the first one that I've come across that like hit the nail on the head of like, but we don't like, they're never the priority. They're the accessory. And like, I'm so grateful for you and your book and the things you're sharing. And I know you probably get a lot of heat for the things you say, because sometimes the truth is just hard to listen to. Okay, so as we're saying all these things, and if a mom is listening and she's like, well, I feel guilty because I haven't been prioritizing my kid. I'm on my phone too much, or I'm working too much, or whatever. And she's feeling this guilt. What do you say about guilt? How do we manage all of that?
So guilt is a healthy reaction as long as it's not in excess, meaning guilt is what we call a signal feeling. It's a feeling that is meant to alert us that we're in conflict. That's all guilt is. Guilt is a reaction to feeling in conflict internally about a decision or about a feeling, having two conflicting feelings. And so if we turn away from that conflict, then we end up doing harm to our children, and usually to ourselves and our relationship with our children. So society tells women to turn away from that feeling and calls it an unnecessary and unimportant feeling. But in fact, it's a very important feeling. There is excessive guilt where you're doing everything right and you still feel guilty. We say there's some neuroses there that needs to be looked at. But in general, guilt is like physical pain. Like if you break your bone, you break your ankle, you don't keep running on it. You stop, you go to the doctor, you see what you need to do about it, you heal it, right? You make a different decision about your activities on that ankle. Pain is the same thing. It's a signal feeling. Physical pain, emotional pain like guilt is conflict. We're meant to stop and pause and look at that and resolve that conflict. And we may make better decisions for ourselves and our babies if we feel guilty. We probably shouldn't be working full time if we can help it. Maybe we work part time, or maybe we take off for a while. If we have to work, then pausing and looking at that guilt feeling helps you to take responsibility for the feelings, so you can look at your baby. I've interviewed a lot of women who don't have choices for my books, a lot of nannies and housekeepers and people in New York who make $12 an hour, who have to, and single mothers who would be homeless if they didn't work because they have no husbands, and we have no paid leave in this country. But that's not, so we're not, those women, when they feel guilty, even that feeling is helpful because it allows them to turn toward their children rather than away from them, and acknowledge the sad feelings and acknowledge the mourning. And that child feels better because that mother has acknowledged the pain of leaving them. So there isn't any situation where guilt is not a good thing, unless it's extremely excessive, in which case we analyze it. But guilt is an important, means your ego, means your conscience and your superego, and that part of your ego is working.
Yeah.
Amazing. Because
it's incredible.
We're active on social media, sharing stuff, and we have shared, for instance, the bucket baby reel that got like 10 something million views. That I don't know if you've heard, but like there's a chiropractor who talks about putting your baby in these buckets, these like sit me ups, the bumbos all the time, is basically like outsourcing you by holding them, by just propping them up before their spine or anything is ready. And through all of the comment section it was like, how dare you shame all the moms? It's like, why is it that if the truth is causing you shame, is that my fault? Like,
that's something you need to look into.
You asked me what I get. That's what I get. I get, when the book first came out, I got a lot of people coming out and saying, you're going to make so many women feel so guilty and so badly. And
but you're not responsible for their emotions.
Yeah.
Well, I said, actually, if they feel guilty and badly, it's not a bad thing, because it means that they're thinking about their children, and it means that they can pause and reflect and try to resolve those conflicts, and they might have a different outcome for their children.
I mean, last year, end of last year, my guilt was extreme, because you start a business thinking, oh, I'm the owner, I can pop in and out as I want to. The next thing you know, you're the owner. Someone calls in sick, you're there. Someone no-shows, you have to go in. And it got to the point at the end of last year, we just shut down the salon and I went back to independent. And now, because I couldn't, like, my stress levels were high. My body felt like it was shutting down. My kid, nobody at that point, the business, myself, my husband, the kid, nobody was getting priority. They were just getting remnants. So at that point, it's like, okay, shut the business down, because none of this is worth my family suffering in the long run.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people want to make that hard decision, because they put their identity so much in their career that, well, if I quit my job, who am I? Well, it's like, you are a mother. That's who you are.
I mean, I think that's a very good point that you just made, that word that you just made. You know, we talk a lot about identity, and how part of women's identity was always nurturing and caretaking. And I think that with the women's movement, it was so eager to shift women's identity away from the nurturing, caretaking role to the work in the outside world role, that it didn't leave room for the nuance that some women might choose that, but women actually needed the choice to hold on to and prioritize the identity of nurturing, and or to integrate it, right? So they didn't talk about integration. I mean, Gloria Steinem had no children. And she said to women, unless you go out and, get a job out in the world, you are not part of this movement. We need you to go out and work in the outside world and make money. And so, she wasn't thinking about children or the consequences or impact on children. And what we know now is that did a lot of damage because it went too far. It didn't say to women, which would have been constructive, you need to have a choice. You don't need to have children to have a meaningful life, but having children is a meaningful life. Yeah. And so, but you should have a choice, and you should also be able to integrate these things. It said, you give up the children and go out into the work world. Yeah. And that was a really destructive. I mean, it was the beginning of the end for children, I would say, for the last 65, 75 years.
Yeah. Or even quantity of children, because my mom, I mean, I'm oldest of 5 and she's the youngest of 7, like lots of kids everywhere. And even back in the 90s, my mom she'd be out with all of us and people, are some of these your grandkids? She's like, no, they're mine. And then they just look at her like, oh, you going to have any more? And it's like, it's none of your business if we have any more, but why put someone down for having a lot of babies when that is the thing she wanted most in this world, is just to have a lot of babies?
I mean, it's an incredibly important role. And if you raise healthy babies, they turn into healthy adults and healthy citizens. And what's more important than relationships? I mean, so, again, I think also society, particularly in America, is very perverse about work outside the home. There's a perversion about it, which is almost fetishistic. It's like a fetish about empowerment through work and achievement and materialism. It's like a fetish, instead of really focusing on relationships. It's become sort of fetishistic to be overly involved, subsumed by work.
It's the I mean, for male and female, but it's like the girl boss culture. Like, like I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like this work is so, like, this is what I'm doing. And I've found that, like, I mean, we worked for a production company where we filmed music videos for the top artists that you see. And we did things that were cool, but like at some point it didn't fulfill us anymore. It was like, this is it. Great. Okay. Blake Shelton music video. Awesome. What about these kids who are like our wombs that are like desperate to nurture? But I appreciate you saying the whole that mothers are like important, because it is important work, because it's interesting going from the career I had to then now I'm technically a stay-at-home mom. And it's funny that like, even we just moved into this house, we bought a farm, and it's funny, the neighbors are like, they're like, oh, so you just stay at home? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you don't know that things happen inside these walls. Like my kid, for one, is like amazing and adorable and is a well-adjusted kid, but also like I'm not just staying at home. Like, it's just interesting.
You asked me what you can do. You know what you can do when somebody says that? Mm-hmm. You can say, actually, did you know that mothering is the most important work there is? Much more important than any other work that you would do outside in the world. And turn around and walk away.
Yeah, I love it.
And so it's I call it setting the record straight.
Yeah.
I think that the narrative needs to change, and it's only going to change if women that are your age, because, I'm not in my prime and I'm not a young woman, but and I'm going to say, if women your age go out and say, mothering is important. Mm-hmm. This is important work. Yeah. And how dare you say that mothering is not the most important work? That's what my Instagram campaign, it's changing the narrative. It's bringing joy and also straightening the record, sort of, getting the record straight about the fact, and really educating people. Yeah.
The last like 2 years, and not to like word vomit, but like the last like 2 years has been changing my own record to be straight. Like, because like she was born and this radical thing happened where I'm like, oh my gosh, she's the most important thing ever. And like, she has to be the priority, to the point where like we sold our like 4,000 square foot house to come live in a very fixer upper homestead, to where we can be more, both of us, both mom and dad can be more present, because we're not, working our tail off to make sure we can pay for this house that we don't really need, because who needs that much house? But like, it's just funny. It's funny. I'm shifting the narrative within myself, like, and it was all very validating to hear your interviews and stuff. And I got your books, and I'm like 75% through the being there. And then we have the Chicken Little that I'm going to finish. I'm going to let you know. But it's just, I appreciate your work so much, because that's part of our mission. My mission within this podcast is to say like, hey, like, don't fear motherhood. Like, it's hard, but like, you kind of choose your hard in life. Like, it's hard to have a full-time job that you're giving your everything to, but it's also very rewarding to give your everything to this kid and kind of see how you can love sacrificially. Like, it's very humbling and a really beautiful thing. Yeah. But okay, we don't want to.
Do you know Aristotle's deathbed question?
No.
It's when you're dying on your deathbed, are you going to be lying there wishing that you had worked more hours for your corporate job, or made more money, or had another car, or had a second home? Or are you going to be lying there with the people you love and who love you, holding your hands, sending you off with a feeling that you've prioritized relationships and love over everything?
Yeah.
And so people often don't project. Maybe we need to project very far forward to know what we need to be doing very far back.
Yeah.
That's I totally agree with that, because so she's my sister-in-law and best friend, and we have we have this podcast together. But when our grandma died, her whole room was surrounded by, she had 9 kids. So it was 9 kids plus all their kids and the spouses. And like, there was not enough room in the hospital room to hold all the people who she had impacted, who loved her. Like,
and like, even I, who had only been a part of the family, I think 10 years before she passed, felt that love from her immediately, because she was so good at, when you were at her house, you were the most important person in the world. And not a lot of people can say they've given that gift to humanity.
Yeah. And her passing and seeing that room filled with people that she impacted, and I was like, that's what I want. I don't not in like a narcissistic, self-absorbed way, but like, I would rather have the community and love that surrounds than like all the money in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
Do you have references we can send people to? Because we don't want to take up all your time, on like what you can do after the fact, after 3. How can the parents who did work or just want to turn things around, where can they go? Or do you have any like parting words for them?
So the second book is actually called Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling. So guess what? The name of that book was Second Chances.
Aww.
And they changed it to Chicken Little. So it's second chances because in adolescence from 9 to 25, you have another opportunity because the brain is shifting and reorganizing. So you have another opportunity to make a very big difference in your children's long-term emotional security and mental health. Mm-hmm. But you have to be there.
Yeah.
You have to be there as much as possible, physically and emotionally. So there's a lot of women that come to see me, and men, mm-hmm. who say, we missed the first window and now we're going to drop out of work for a while, one of us, so we can be around for our teenage kids, so we can take them to school in the morning and have those side-by-side conversations, so we can pick them up at school, so we can go to their games, so we can, play baseball in the backyard with them, so we can spend the weekends playing with them instead of working on our, jobs and homework from our jobs. So, it's, there's another opportunity there to make a difference.
And then do you also have resources for parents who maybe didn't have that shift? For instance, I had overheard someone else's client talking in the salon, and the stylist said, "Oh, what are you going to do after this?" She said, "Oh, I have to go pick up my kids." She said, "It's the worst part of my day because all they want to do is talk about what happened all day." And I was like, in my chair, like, your poor child, I'll pick them up. I want to hear about their day.
Well, there it is. So the best way I can describe it is, if you're not interested in your children, why should they ever feel good about themselves?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
Why should they ever be interested in themselves or feel interesting if you're not interested primarily in them? Crazy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense.
But if there are parents that are like on the cusp of wanting to make a big change, do you have any resources for them? Either your own or something we can link that would be like a good starting shift?
Well, I think I would read Chicken Little, and then they can reach out to me directly if they want to have a session or.
I didn't know you offered sessions.
And we'll post links to everything in our description.
So, we'll post that.
So you go to my website, which is www.komisar.com, and then you can see the books are on there and the articles I've written in the podcast interviews, and then also a place if you want to reach out to me.
Perfect.
Now, what's best for you? Is it best for us to direct for people to go buy your books at your website or to post like an Amazon link? Is that?
It doesn't matter. Amazon, because all my website does is direct them to Barnes & Noble and Amazon.
Perfect.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
The work you're doing is so important, and we appreciate you saying the hard things to make the huge difference.
Yeah.
We really appreciate
it. Thank you for asking hard questions.
You've made such a difference in my life, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here. We hope you guys enjoyed this. And we'll talk to you Monday.
Thanks for being with us today. Follow us on Instagram at @underthesun_podcast. We'd love to meet you.
Please help us out by subscribing on YouTube and leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time. Please remember this information is made available to you for informational and educational purposes only. It is in no way a substitute for medical advice.